So for my string border, I decided that I was originally going to make blocks, and so I had started making more units where they were at least 6.5 inches wide. And at some point I decided I wasn't going to do that. Now I could have continued sewing and just sewed all of these panels straight together, but what I found sometimes, and especially for beginner quilters, if you don't have enough extra length onto your piece and your strip gets a little slanted or cattywampus, then it's very hard to square up a straight strip to put on your border when you're piecing the string blocks. So the first thing I did was decide how much string border did I need for my quilt. So I have 4 sides of my quilt. My quilt is now 82.5 inches on all sides because I'm keeping my quilt square. So I just divided 82 by 6 and I came out with 14. So I need approximately 14 6.5 inch strips to go into the length of my border. So I just started piecing strings that were at least 6. They could be 9. It didn't really matter, but I wanted to just keep them in smaller units at this point. And then what I did to each of those units, I went and pressed them with my starch alternative, and I have a video online about that. I'll put a little notation up in the top corner for you. And what I did was I just squared these blocks up. Now they're not squared up to 6 inches, they're just squared so that I can get the same length. I want to cut this 8.5 inches. So all I want to do is just square up 2 sides to start. And then when I square up this time, I want to put my 8.5 inch line on the bottom. The width is not a factor at this point. All I want to do is just get straight block edges. So I can use even my 1/8 markings on my ruler to make sure that everything is straight. So anything that I'm trimming off should most definitely be less than 1/4 of an inch. So then I'll go and cut the excess off the top here. And if you want, you can keep these and start making crumbs or mile a minute type quilts. And that's a whole nother video, so I'll maybe do one of those in the future. So this happened to square up at 6.5 by 8.5, but that's not really my goal. So I'm going to do another one just to show you that I'm not really paying attention to the width. I'm just paying attention to how long my block is. So I have another one here. I'm just getting as close to the edge and making sure that I've got a little room to trim off on my left side and the top. And I'm using a rotating mat just to make it easier for me in taping these for you. So, but I would also use this anyway because it's just a lot easier. Now you can see that my block is way wider than 6.5. I don't care about the width. All I want to do is make sure that I've got the 8.5 inch mark on the bottom first, and I want that squared up. And then I just want to slide back to my next mark where I have everything under the ruler where I can trim on all sides. And if it's very close, it's no big deal. I can just go down another 1/8 of a mark because I'm not going to be losing that much material. My point is I want this block to be square under the square up ruler. Okay. So So now if I show you the first block that I just trimmed, you can see that the widths are not equal. All I want to do is just trim all of my little block segments into 8.5 inches long, no matter what the width is. So I've done that to a few blocks here, and they are all different sizes. So the next thing that I do, I just go to my sewing machine. If you need to use pins, please do so. I make sure that these two edges are equal, and then I sew 1/4 of an inch. And I just chain piece these through. As many as I need. So then after I have them sewn, you'll have something that looks like this. So this is just 2 blocks sewn. At this time, I'm not doing any pressing. I'm just making blocks. After I get 2 sets of 2 sewn, so this is 1 set of 2, and then I add it. Now I've got 4 of those blocks sewn, and as you can see, everything is nice and straight. I don't have to square up a long border strip when I get ready to add it to my quilt. Everything is nice and square now. So then if I have 4s, I can go ahead and add my 8s. Now for some people this may be the length of your quilt, so you only have to add as many of these things together as you need. You may need to add an 8 and maybe just a 2 to finish your border. And if that's what it is, then you stop at that point. But I have sewn one that has all of the 14 panels included, and it is very long here. So it goes, I'm just going to show you through the camera how much material I'm using to trim from. Okay. So then once I get that, I divide my quilt measurement into 2. So my quilt measurement is 82 1/2. So I need 41 1/4 if I'm going to fold it. And I do that because I don't have a long enough ruler that will handle all of that. So I go and I press all of these seams. It doesn't matter which direction because the string blocks are sewn and pressed in either direction from when you were piecing them. So that's not very critical. But then once all of this is pressed, I will fold this in half, and then I will cut my 41 1/4 off. And it's further down there. So I'll just pull this down, and let's just say that at the 20 mark was my 41 1/4. Then I would just trim that off, and then I would use these other pieces to start either my next blocks or maybe another border. I tend to work on one border side at a time so that anything that I'm trimming off of this piece I can go back and use on my next border, so I'm not wasting anything. And then the last thing that I recommend you do when you're having piece borders is to stay stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge, just long as it's less than 1/4 so that it won't show when you put your binding on. It's sufficient. And it will keep your quilt from being stretched when it's put on a long warm quilting frame, and or it will keep the edges of your quilt from coming apart, because remember, we've taken rotary cutter across most of these seams, so they could be a little weak at the edges. So I always go across my borders because that's the last seam that's going to be on my quilt. Elsewhere in the quilt you have something else going across those strings, so they're going to be stable as they were being pieced into the quilt. So that's my border here, and I'm just going to use my border strips and pretend like they're on my quilt top, and I'm coming into this corner. So I've got a border going that way. And then I've got my other border going here. So let me pull these down for you. My next step was to determine what did I want to put in this corner here. And I really thought I wanted to miter the corners so that the strings would meet up with each other on the diagonal. And that is what I want to do. But miter corners can be hard for some people. The way to get around that is to use squares. And you just make a half square triangle. So that's what I'm going to do. So let me just slide this up and over temporarily. Again, we're going right back now and using basic half square triangle rules. You know, if you want a half square triangle to finish a particular size, you add 7/8 of an inch. So you cut 2 squares 7/8 of an inch larger than the size you want. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and cut mine 1 inch larger because I want the option of squaring my blocks up to make sure that they are the correct size. So I have already cut 4 squares and I'm only showing you 2 here. And then what I want to do with these stripes facing the same direction, I want to turn this right sides together. And then I want to draw a line diagonally through the center. When I do that, these pieces are very big, and to keep them from flopping around, I put some pins in here to make sure that they don't move. And I just stick one down in this corner to keep that corner from getting under my sewing machine needle. And I'll put one more in the center. Now when I go to my sewing machine, I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch on each side of that drawn line. That is what I have here on this block. I have 2 stitch lines going directly through the center. When I cut this out on the drawn line, I now have 2 half square triangles. Now I will press this seam open, but because I am trying to keep this video moving, I am just going to show you here. And what I end up with is 2 half square triangle units back into a square that now have the mitering happening for me. So I don't have to do that on my actual big quilt top. I've done it with just using squares. Now when I pull these units for my border back into view for you to see, and this one I'm going to have to hold so that it doesn't fall. I want you to see that if you put this block down wrong, you will think, oh, it didn't work because the lines are going in one direction but they don't meet up on the other direction. Just keep turning your half square triangles. They still don't work, but maybe that's an option that you like. That could be a variable option. But if you turn and see something that you like, then you can use that for your setting. And this is the one that I like. So depending on how you put this half square triangle in will determine how your corner will look. This is the look that I'm going for. I want it to look like my strips continued up and I mitered that corner. So this is what I'm going to sew into my quilt top.